Ever since Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim announced that Malaysia will be joining BRICS as a partnering country, many people have been asking, what is BRICS? Well, a brief Google online, you'll find that BRICS is made out of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It is an alliance that is standing against G7 and is supposed to represent the voice of Global South. But what does it truly mean, and will Malaysia truly benefit from this? Well, in order to truly understand this subject and to know what BRICS truly stand for, we have to understand where global trade starts. Back in the 2nd century, there was this thing called Silk Road. It is basically a network of roads that connect Asia, Europe, and Africa. What happened is that businessmen from each of these continents will use this road to trade with each other. That was the beginning of global trade. Then in the 15th and 17th century, we see more and more Western empires starting to come up and explore different continents to look for resources and new land. Because why? They needed more resources than their own country can provide. Imagine if you need to build tires, or you need to build cars, or you need to sell textile, you need more cotton, you need to find more land, you need to find more people. So where do you get it? Well, go to other places and find for it. It was during those times that you hear names like Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, who travel all around the globe looking for new land and new resources. But going there to just trade for goods wasn't enough. Why? Because there are other nations as well who are trying to build their wealth, right? So there's a lot of competitor out there. If you're just gonna acquire goods in the free market, well, that's not very secure. Someone may become more competitive and win you in this battle of economy, right? So they came up with a brilliant idea. Why not we just conquer this place and make it our colony? That's how colonization came about. Malaysia was a colony of the British Empire. Indonesia at one point was a colony of Holland. And that was when we start seeing these two different groups of countries, the colonies and the colony. The colony's job is to supply all the resources that the colonies need to grow their economic machine. This continued for a very long time until World War happened. After World War II, many of these colonist nations decided to fight for their own independence. They do not want to be a colony anymore. They want to be a free country, an independent country. What happened was that the Western world tried their very best to hold on to their power, but they realized that there's nothing much they can do in the end. They just have to let them go. But this comes together with a different problem. Because you see, many of these colony countries were supplying resources to their colonies. For example, in Malaysia, we were supplying rubber and we were supplying tin to the British Empire. In Kenya, they were supplying coffee to the British Empire as well. US was supplying cotton to the British Empire as well. So how are they going to maintain in power if these countries are no more going to supply them with the resources that they need? Here is where colonialism evolved. It became what we call neo-colonialism, which is a new form of colonization. In this case that I want to talk about is what we call economic colonization. While many of these colonist countries like Malaysia and many other countries were given their independence, but their economy was designed in such a way from the beginning to continuously supply the resources needed by their colonies, like the British Empire in this case. Remember, even after Malaysia got independence, we were still supplying rubber and we were still supplying tin to the UK, and they were still producing goods out of it and bringing it back to Malaysia to sell it to us. Then take a look at a country like Kenya. When the British colonists went in, they realized it's a great place to plant coffee beans. So they kicked out the locals and created coffee bean plantation. They hired back the locals to work on the plantation to supply the coffee bean back to the UK. And after they were given independence, until today, Kenya is still a country that supplies coffee to the world trade. Now, I know that many people right now argue that it is up to this colonist nation to take charge and grow their country. Look at a country like Singapore, that today it's considered one of the advanced countries in the world. But the truth is, in today's world, we still have to play according to certain rules, and these rules are being set by a certain group of countries. let's talk about the United Nations. You see, after World War II, many countries were afraid the World War will happen again, so they got together to start setting rules of the world. In a way, they were coming together to try to make better rules and better policies so that countries will not clash with each other and create another war. That was a good thing. It helps to maintain order and peace in this world. But here's the problem. The countries that came together and set the rules, most of them were the ex-colonies. We're talking about countries like US, British, France, Italy, Germany, Japan. Don't you notice that most of them are the colonies? What about the colony nations like Malaysia, Africa, and so on? Well, they are not really in the decision-making position there. Most of these nations will just have to obey whatever rules and policies that were being set. Alright, I know many people right now will say, hey, you don't understand. Actually, there's a lot of system that they have to go through. Ultimately, it is everyone agreed together. It is kind of like a democracy. Yeah, kind of. I'm not saying that they are entirely bad. In fact, I think UN is quite good. They are here to maintain the world order. But over the years, they have received quite a lot of criticism. And here's where it's best that I bring out some of these issues. For example, when we talk about World Bank and IMF, their role is actually to provide financial assistance to nations who are in dire financial needs. But what happens is that the terms and conditions of the loan that they gave very often is not that good to that country, but rather makes it better for the MNCs who are going to go in there and establish their business. All in the name of better transparency and a better way of working and efficiency, but over long term, it doesn't really develop the nation. Apparently, rumors has it that there's also unspoken rule about from which country the leadership of IMF or World Bank will be appointed. Not just that, there's also a lot of inequality when it comes to environmental and climate issues. You know how many Asian countries were being blamed for plastic pollution of the world and are contributing to many of the greenhouse gases? Well, it's not quite so. Remember in 2019, Malaysia, we actually sent back 267 containers of plastic waste to countries like US, UK, Canada, France, Singapore, and Spain. Yes, they export rubbish to our country and we had to send it back. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, isn't there rules about this? Well, in a way, there's this thing called a Basel Convention. It kind of sets the rules regarding climate change issues, right? What happened was that during one of the sessions discussing about this issue, many of the developing countries and environmental NGO voted for a complete ban on the transfer of hazardous waste. But what happened was, developed countries actually prefer a more flexible approach. So, just because of this minority developed countries prefer a more flexible approach, they actually were able to use this flexibility as a loophole to send out their waste to less developed countries like Malaysia and many other Southeast Asian countries as well. So, in UK, when they ship out their waste, it's considered as recycling. But when it lands on our shore, we actually have to set up a plan to actually really recycle this waste. And imagine a country like Malaysia or even other smaller countries who already do not have enough resources to develop our nation, right? You need to set up all these kind of plans some more. How on earth is it going to happen? Isn't it supposed to be you as a more developed nation, you got more money, so then you should use the money to take care of all these kind of things? But instead, you send it all the way to a country like Malaysia and you expect us to actually take care of this rubbish? That's not fair, right? Well, let's talk about the next kind of inequality here. This is in the area of intellectual property rights and medicine. Many of these developed countries, under the pressure from pharmaceutical companies, have pushed for stringent intellectual property rights protection through agreements like TRIPS. This has restricted the access to affordable medicine in developing countries, particularly those who are hardest hit by diseases like HIV and AIDS. On one hand, it's capitalism to protect these companies. On one hand, it's also difficult for developing nations who do not have enough resources to acquire this kind of medicine. Well, with a few of these examples, we can kind of see things are really not that equal. There are a lot of decisions and policies being set that kind of favors these more developed nations, these advanced industrialist nations like US, UK, and Europe, and so on. And all this has been things that many of these developing nations has been dealing with and have not said much. Until the US-China trade war. They kind of poked the bear there. To understand in detail what truly happened, we're going to take a look at this in the part 2 of our series, The Rise of China. To put it in short, what happened was that China started developing and become a stronger country. Eventually, they managed to climb to become the second largest economy in the world. But then, that was when US realized that, oh my god, this country could be bigger than me later. And they got worried. So they started targeting China, setting rules that are unfair to them, tariffs and so on. And since China was not the only country that felt they were being bullied by the US, a few of these countries got together and formed an alliance to fight against the US. In other words, the G7. Stay tuned to our next episode as we deep dive into the rise of BRICS.